Metroid Fusion changed the Metroid series. Not only did Samus have a new look, the game featured a marked shift in tone that narrowed in on sci-fi horror more than previous entries. As Samus embarked on a new mission facing a new threat, she would learn that her greatest enemy is actually herself. Join us as we dive into the dark and threatening corridors of the BSL space station to revisit the 2002 Game Boy Advance classic, Metroid Fusion. Side note, 2002... Sorry, my wife just stood at the end of the hallway and scared the crap out of me while we're recording our Halloween episode of the podcast. What better timing than anything else? Holy cow,
Well
dear
done,
patrons.
well
Enjoy
done.
that. Skinner's probably going to leave this in, but your scarf looks great, babe. You did a good job. Holy crap. I literally saw the corner of my eye someone just standing at the end of the hallway, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's awesome.
Perfectly timed. Perfectly timed. All right, let me get to what I was going to say about the game here.
2002.
So, fun fact about this game: the game came out in 2002. It's been almost 20 years since the game came out.
19. Yep.
We should have never recorded this episode because all it's done is make me feel progressively more old as the episode has gone on, and so
it's painful.
That's just what it is. Getting older, man. You just get little reminders like that of how old you really are, and
it's weird too because when you think back at some of these dates and you start aligning them, it's like this and Halo 1 are like a year apart.
No, they're not.
When Fusion dropped, Halo was like the hotness. It was like at its peak. Like it had just dropped, the Xbox had launched, and then those happened like because I remember there was Halo and Metroid Prime came out right next to each other.
Yeah.
Like you got Nintendo's shooter and you got Xbox's shooter.
Oh,
and there was a lot of comparison done because they were like space shooters.
Jonathan, we're going to have to end the episode here, man. I'm feeling way too old.
It's just wild, man.
It is wild. It is absolutely wild. But I guess I'll try to be positive about this and look at it. I shouldn't say that sounds really negative, but I'm going to try and look at this positively. I'm like, we're revisiting cool games, good memories, except for the part where I remember I'm old.
But now you have the wisdom to run a cool podcast. See,
that's true. That's true. So glass half full, I suppose.
There you go.
Before we get into kind of the development history, I want to leave a quick note here in case anyone is listening to this show for the very first time and you're curious about how we typically handle these episodes. Granted, the game is almost 20 years old, so I feel like we don't really need to do any spoiler alerts because of how old the game is. But at the same time, we will be doing a plot synopsis of the game, development history, spoiler-free review, and just kind of sharing our first time or first experiences with the game. And then we'll get into the themes, kind of breaking the game down, getting more in depth with it. And that's the point where if you, for whatever reason, don't want a 20-year-old game spoiled, then that is when you can duck out. But again, it's a 20-year-old game almost. I think you're okay. I think most people know how the story goes, especially if you've already played Metroid Dread at this point, because by the time this episode releases, everybody will have played Metroid Dread, including yourself, yours truly. But all that aside, plot synopsis for the game goes, while escorting researchers on SR-388, Samus is attacked by the X-Parasite, but appears to be all right, or so it seems. On their voyage back, Samus loses consciousness and her ship veers off into an asteroid belt, destroying her ship and rendering her in critical condition. The X-Parasite was later to be found out that it had infected Samus' central nervous system, which forced the Galactic Federation to use a cure made from the cells of the infant Metroid that Samus found in Super Metroid. Thankfully, the cure works, giving Samus a brand new suit and the ability to absorb the X-Parasites for nourishment. However, it gives her the adverse effects of being cold, which is the same weakness as the Metroids. Parts of Samus' infected suit were sent to a BSL station for examination, and shortly after awakening, Samus receives a distress signal from that same station, notifying the Galactic Federation of explosion aboard the station. Samus is then sent in to check things out with the help of her new ship's computer that she names after her former commanding officer, Adam Malkovich. And upon the station, Samus learns that the X-Parasite is running rampant, and she faces, again, her most formidable enemy yet, herself. And so that's the brief synopsis of the game. It's super stinking dope. Easily one of my favorite or it's not Super Metroids, but one of my favorite Metroid games in the series, if not my favorite one as of yet. We'll see how Metroid Dread fares. But yeah, we'll kind of go from there. I'll run through this development history. There's a lot to get through, so I will try to read through this as quickly as possible while stopping at a few different things here. We've already mentioned the game released in 2002, the same day and date as Metroid Prime on the GameCube. They had some cool connectivity perks there where if you played, what was it? I think if you played Metroid Fusion, if you connected Metroid Fusion to Metroid Prime, you got the X suit from Metroid Fusion. Then Metroid Prime would give you some extra in-game items inside Metroid Fusion, so you could get that a little bit early on in the game, if I remember correctly. And I think it unlocks some artwork and a soundtrack. Don't quote me on that though. But what was interesting about this game is that it was developed by Nintendo R&D 1, who, if you listen to our Super Metroid episode, you would know this is the same studio in Nintendo that developed Super Metroid, the game before this one in the series. So pretty cool fact. I was doing some research on that. I was like, well, that's very fitting that the team that did Super Metroid worked on this one too, because it explains why the game feels a lot like Super Metroid.
Yeah, I
In
don't think I
several
knew
ways.
that. That makes a lot of sense, but I don't think I ever considered that.
Yeah, and
That's
I
awesome.
hadn't either until I did this research. But I was like, that's really dope. Some fun facts about the game. When the game was originally shown, it went by Metroid 4 and featured Samus in a darker suit and an engine that looked reminiscent of Game Boy Color graphics. Samus also appeared to be wall running and moving on the ceilings in the game. So, can you imagine if we had that? That's even more nightmare inducing. Just thinking of Samus like crawling on the ceilings and running on walls. It's like, nah, that's okay. I don't need that. Oh man! Before the game was revealed, rumors circulated that this game would actually be a port of Super Metroid, but the series designer Yoshio Sakamoto decided to create an original story out of a desire to create something that no one had played before. And in a 2003 interview with computerandvideogames.com, he said, "Many of our designers and creators want to challenge something new want the challenge of something new rather than simply porting over an old title. That's something I hope we'll always do. If you can challenge something new, you can look forward to the public response, be it good or bad," which I think is cool because I believe, no, it's Mercury Steam that's doing Metroid Dread, the same guys that did Super or Samus Returns. But
Right.
I thought that was a cool mindset to go into the game.
Yeah.
What's interesting about R&D 1, they didn't consult any past games in the Metroid series for programming, but rather used Wario Land 4 as a frame of reference.
Wow. Now, I also love that game. That's a very good game.
Really?
Yes, Wario Land 4 is excellent. Like it's one of my favorite GBA games, no lie. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look this game up then and try, because I've never played it.
It's
before.
really, really fun. It's a good game, dude. Yeah, I recommend it.
I'll have to check it out then. If any of you dear listeners have a copy of it, let me know, and I might reach out to you to take it off your hands. The game is different than other games in the series, where this took on a more mission style focus rather than kind of like an open world aspect that you would see in previous games like Samus Returns and even the first Metroid and Super Metroid specifically. The music for the game was composed by, I'm going to butcher these names, was composed by Minako Hamano and Akita Fujiwara. I think I pronounced that right. Metroid Fusion features jingles from Super Metroid that were rearranged for Metroid Fusion style, which you can kind of tell in the opening theme of the game and a few other parts that start playing some different music throughout the station. They're very reminiscent of Super Metroid. And the game was actually set to feature voice acting, but due to ROM cartridge limitations, voices were only used for warnings such as like the self-destruct protocols and the evacuation orders when those were going on. So we didn't get the voice acting. Unfortunately, we got it in Other M, and it sounded like garbage.
And now we thank God. This is where we thank God for cartridge limitations.
Yep, PTL for that. Metroid Fusion was launched on November 18th, 2002, which, like I said, is nearly 20 years ago now. In its first week, the game sold over 100,000 copies and then finished out the month just shy of 200,000 at 199,723 copies sold, which means that the game sold about $5.5 million, making it the third best-selling GBA game that month. So it did pretty good, at least for the time.
Is it the best selling Metroid game, 2D Metroid game, or was
That I don't know. The only stats I got was that it was like the third best selling GBA game for November of 2002. I don't
okay?
know
That's all good.
where it sits in the pantheon of all the games.
Looks like it's.
Um,
I have to look at Google.
I don't know. Someone will have to write in and let us know. The game was later released on the 3DS Virtual Console in December of 2011 as part of the Ambassador Program for the 3DS. It was also released on the Wii U Virtual Console in April of 2014, and that is where it remains because Nintendo, at least at the time of this recording, hasn't ported it over to the Switch. You jerks. Get on
Tragedy.
it.
Tragedy.
Get on it, you cowards. The game released to critical acclaim, receiving a 10 out of 10 from Game Informer. X-Play, y'all remember that show? Stated that the game was a pleasure to play and highlighted the game's audio and graphics. Several critics, GamePro being one, stated disappointment in how short the game felt. And then earlier this year, Nintendo unveiled a sequel to Metroid Fusion and Metroid Dread, which by the time this episode releases is already out and available, and I'm hoping is super stinking good. Hopefully it's not a disappointment, but we'll see how it goes. Jonathan, with all of that brief, not really brief, but all that development history, man, anything stand out to you apart from R&D1 working on this game?
Man, I'm just really glad that they decided. It sounds like a lot of what we got might not have happened if certain things hadn't fallen the way they had. Like it sounds there were some pretty key decisions. Like it was just gonna be a port. And then they were like, you know what? Let's just make the greatest Metroid game ever instead. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't know. But it's just, I just can't wait to talk about it. It's such a good game. I will say I was Googling while you were reading all that stuff, and it looks like it is the fourth best selling Metroid game of all time across all Metroid games.
So what's the top three then?
So Metroid Prime is the best selling at 2.84 million copies.
Okay.
The original Metroid is second at 2.73.
Wow.
Metroid 2 Return of Samus on Game Boy is 1.72, and then Fusion at 1.6 million.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. And then Super Metroid at 1.42.
Oh, wow. Man, even less. I feel like, man, I'm kind of okay with that. Man, I think I knew about Metroid Prime being the number one because of the GameCube and just how I feel like that appealed more to people than what the 2D side scrolling did, at least for the time being. Because that's kind of because you mentioned like Halo had come out around the time, and that's kind of when people were getting into first person shooters, and Metroid Prime fit into that category to a degree.
I mean, I walked into GameStop in 2002 not knowing about Metroid at all. I didn't know what Metroid was.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw Metroid Prime, a huge stand for Metroid Prime with gameplay, and I was like, this is on Nintendo? Like, what? I have to have this.
Right.
And that's where my Metroid fandom began, was that. And so, yeah, it had that draw of like that. I mean, 2002, that was like the start of the peak of the FPS like reign, where everything was a shooter. And so, yeah, that does make sense that it did so well.
Yeah, definitely. So with Metroid Prime, I guess being your first thing into the Metroid series or just the fandom, how did you come across Metroid Fusion then?
So actually, my brothers and I found Prime, and we were all like super into GameCube at that point. Like that's all we played was GameCube, Smash Melee, all that stuff. And we were like, we got to get this. We split our money, got Prime. Then I think it might have been the same day, but it was very close to that same time where they were like, we realized there was another game called Metroid on the Game Boy Advance, which we also owned. And we were about to go on a family vacation for like a week and a half.
Perfect timing.
And so we were like, dude, let's buy Metroid, because we couldn't bring the GameCube with us. So like, dude, let's buy Metroid Fusion, whatever that is, and like bring it with us on vacation. So I played Metroid in my family's car driving to Florida or Tennessee or wherever we were going, and beat it. Like my brothers and I like traded off and took turns. We all beat it on the way like there and back. And so I got those two experiences very close together.
That's cool.
So I got like what in my opinion is the greatest 3D Metroid and the greatest 2D Metroid at the same time. Like what a year that was.
Yeah, definitely, man. And that's cool. I think so. I guess since then, and this is kind of getting a little off topic to a degree, but like since then, I mean, what has kind of been your experience with the Metroid series as a whole?
Well, I went back. So at the time, I kind of like let it lie. I beat both a few more times. I beat Prime Echoes when it came out. I beat Prime Corruption when it came out. Like I beat both of those like day and date when they came out. And then after that, I kind of let it go. And then it wasn't until I got a little older and I started like looking backwards and being like, what have I missed in the Metroid universe? That I went back and I tried valiantly to beat the original. That is tough. That's like playing
It's hard.
that's like
There's
playing
no
Destiny
map.
2. Yeah, there's no map. The movement is like very floaty and strange, and like the combat's very tough. It's just a really hard game to play.
Yeah.
So I never beat that. But then when Zero Mission dropped, I was all over that. And you just recently beat Zero Mission for the first time yourself, so you know like
Mhm.
what a game that is.
Awesome game.
Well, I mean that's like textbook how to do a remake, or not a remake, how to do a remaster of a game. I guess it's
Mhm.
kind of a remake though, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is because of that addition at the end where you play as Samus outside of her suit.
Oh, so good. So yeah, I did
But
that, and then I haven't played. So I played all the primes, but the big one I haven't played recently is Samus Returns, the remake,
okay.
because by the time it came out, I had already sold my 3DS. I was all Switch, and I was just like, I'm not buying a 3DS just for this.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'll play it one day. I don't know, but it seemed like it was, from everything I saw, it was fine but not great.
Hmm.
Anyway, so but I'm very very excited for Dread.
Yeah.
Um,
Same here. My hype at the point. I mean, we're recording this the Monday of the week that Metroid Dread's coming out, and my hype is through the roof. I can't wait for this game. So
mhm.
I'm hoping it's good. Yeah, I would agree on Samus Returns. It was like I enjoyed it, but it's definitely probably at least the remake is the weakest out of all the 2D Metroids that I played. But
Yeah.
yeah, serviceable. We'll hope. I would love to see it get ported to Switch though, maybe touched up a little bit. I think that would work really well on the Switch. With with my first impressions of Metroid Fusion, I had Nintendo Power for a long time, a subscription that I was talking to some people on Twitter about that here recently, actually. And when I had the Super Nintendo, Super Metroid was one of the first games I picked up with it and played it, loved it, never finished it until a few years ago on YouTube, which, by the way, dear listeners, full playthrough is up over there on YouTube if you want to check that out. But at that point, I was like, man, I really want to play more Metroid games if I can. And so when I got the GameCube and I started getting Nintendo Power magazines that were talking about Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion, I was like, I want both of these games. And I
Mm.
had a Game Boy Advance, I had a GameCube, and I begged my parents to get the connector cable so I could, connect both of the games in there. I begged my parents to get me Metroid Prime and to get Metroid Fusion, and saved up some birthday money and picked those up, and just it was weird, not really weird. It was kind of dope playing Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion at the same time. Not literally at the same time, but uh, just playing them kind of simultaneously almost or parallel to one another. And I just remember Metroid Fusion just being, and even to this day, like the game feels like a little bit of a horror game. And I was kind of scared to a degree of some things. Like when you first encounter SAX, where she blows open this wall after you take this elevator down to the elevator station, and it zooms in on their face and their eyes are just widened out, and it's terrifying. The music still like plays this really ominous, threatening music. It was really terrifying, man. But I really loved it. I loved Samus's suit. I loved the gameplay. I loved everything about it. And it's funny that people were saying that they felt the game was short, because I think it took me 8 to 10 hours to play through the game the first time on the Game Boy Advance. Granted, I was a dumb baby gamer, so I wasn't very observant. So, I didn't know the old rule of Metroid, which is when in doubt, bomb it out. Just blow up everything with a bomb. But it was a lot of fun. I remember enjoying it, and I remember after selling my Game Boy Advance with Metroid Fusion, I had always wanted to get back to the game. And so I even bought a cartridge of it off of eBay earlier this year, just so I could play through it again using my Retroad, where I can connect Game Boy games to my PC and play them that way. And so it's definitely, I guess this kind of gets into our spoiler free reviews of the game, because this has kind of been floated around a little bit. Is this the best 2D Metroid game? Now, again, we're recording this before Metroid Dread comes out, so that our opinions may change. but I sincerely doubt it. In your opinion, Jonathan, is Metroid Fusion the best 2D Metroid game?
All right, now everybody buckle up because here come the opinions.
Here we go.
Now, I vacillated on this a lot. I have vacillated on this a lot over the past several years, where I'm like, the two that I would put up for debate would be Zero Mission and Fusion. Now, that's partially because I have not finished Super Metroid yet. I've played a good chunk of it, haven't finished
Mhm.
it. But I would, even with that, and knowing, having seen a lot of gameplay and stuff, I would say it's a toss up between Fusion and Zero Mission. Like that was always my opinion. So before this episode, I did some homework where I didn't have time to beat the game myself, but I watched a 100% playthrough. This guy
Mhm.
did. We didn't rush it, but he just played through it and just did everything. And I kind of skipped through that, and I took notes all along the way. And I tried to, I sort of, I looked at it. It's a good thing I wasn't playing it because I was able to look at it in a way I haven't before. Excuse me. And I coming out of that with all the notes I took and the things I realized and put together, watching it all in one sitting like that, I would call this unequivocally the best 2D Metroid game in existence. And I would say it's actually not that close. Now Zero Mission is great,
Mhm.
but I think Fusion doesn't barely eke out a win. I think it's demonstrably superior. And we'll talk about why, but that is my personal opinion.
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest. Having, like I said, the day before we were recording this, I played through the entire game in an afternoon, and it amazed me at how a game that's nearly 20 years old still holds up insanely well on every single area, from the gameplay to the visuals to the storytelling or the writing. Although I do think it gets a little, what's the word, like they tend to kind of they speed things up a little bit towards the end, specifically with the computer's AI, but that's a
Hmm.
kind of a small uh, gripe about the game. But even just the music, it's amazing that one, a 20-year-old game still holds up as well as it does. It's even more amazing that a game of this caliber and this well designed was on the Game Boy Advance. Like
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it there were times I was playing the game yesterday and I was just kind of stopping myself and going, this was on the Game Boy Advance. And like
We
the
did not know what
music,
we had.
dude, I don't think we really did. I think only now as we look back, and maybe this is just because my nostalgia is coating my eyesight, but or maybe it's the glaucoma for how old I am. I don't know. But the thing is that like this game is so. This is probably a controversial statement, but this game is more well designed than half of the games that come out now, and it came out in 2002.
I was gonna say that when you stopped this, when you were like done with what you were saying. The next thing I was gonna say was not only does it hold up, it flat out outclasses many games that try to do what it does today.
Yeah, and it's just it's a great game, and what I think for me, I'll probably agree with you and say that this is, in my opinion, the best 2D Metroid, and I think because it encapsulates and refines what the Metroid formula is. It's that isolation. It takes the subtle undertones of fear and horror that are in the previous games and just leans into it hard.
Mhm.
And the gameplay, of course, is top notch. I will agree it is a little bit easy and it is a little too linear, but I think that helps it out in the gameplay because I finished the game in under 3 hours. But that was just because I knew what I was doing. I remembered a lot of things, and I also looked up a guide and didn't try to get the extra stuff. But I know I did the thing that you're not supposed to do when you play Metroid. But it's just, I mean, I feel like I can't say any more about it. It is top tier game design. It's top tier Metroid. It's the quintessential 2D Metroid. Now, again, that may change with Metroid Dread. I don't know, but
I hope it does.
I hope it does too. But I will say that I won't be surprised or disappointed if Metroid Dread doesn't beat out Metroid Fusion, because
Yeah.
how do you? This game is almost perfection in regards to Metroid. So
Yeah.
it is what it is.
I
But
continue.
I was gonna say I was gonna transition into the themes and stuff and put out the spoiler warning and stuff, but unless you had something to add before we go over that.
Well, I was just a quick sort of synopsis back to Dread or to Fusion versus other Metroid games. There are, when it comes to like how you think of a video game and how what the pros and cons are, there's often like pillars of game design where you've got the gameplay, you've got the story, you've got the art, you've got the sound design, you've got these pillars of like the things you look at to say, is this game good or is it not good? And in many cases with great games, like my favorite game of all time, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, amazing gameplay, amazing exploration, great music, great all this beautiful art, all this stuff, horrible storytelling, like not a textbook example of how you tell a story in a video game. Now, they weren't trying to do that. They intentionally made that quote unquote bad to serve the other things, but like it's missing that for sure. Fusion has it all. It has excellent storytelling. It has excellent gameplay. It is a little easy. It's a little easy, but the gameplay is fun to do. It's satisfying to do, to play. It has beautiful art, great music, a great atmosphere. Like it's just like there isn't any part of the game where I'm like, this is great, but that part, that pillar of game design wasn't so great. Like it's all really good. Whereas I
Right.
would say like in Zero Mission, there's a lot going for it, but the storytelling isn't super strong in Zero Mission. It's got an interesting story, but it's very, very rote and like straightforward.
Yeah.
Whereas Fusion is like twists and turns and tension and so
Yeah.
that's all I'd say about that.
Fair enough, man. I pulled up my notes here because I took some notes while I was playing the game, and kind of going into this isn't really spoiler territory yet. We'll get into that after I mention this. But one of the things I noted in this game is just the attention to detail in this game, because I noticed when I was playing the game, when you get into Sector 2, there's this area that it's kind of like marshy, foresty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When you land on the floor on a certain spot, you see like droplets of water spray out when you land, and I'm like, this is a Game Boy Advance game, and they're putting that kind of detail in. Again, small things probably a lot of people miss. To me, blew my mind playing this yesterday, because I'm like, how did they think to do this?
They didn't have to do that.
Yeah, it's the little things, man. It's those things that. And so, I mean, there's things where there's like creatures hanging out in the background, and then when you come back through those areas, they're there front and center attacking you. It's just dope things like that. The rubble and terrain changes after SAX has gone through an area, or monsters have, or I mean, it's just it's really well done, really well designed, really well designed. And with that being said, we'll get into the spoiler territory here, kind of going more in depth with the game mechanics, the themes, and things of that nature. So if you really don't want a nearly 20-year-old game spoiled beyond what we've already talked about in terms of the music, how it's designed, those kind of things, and this is your opportunity to tune out and I guess go buy a Wii U and play Metroid Fusion over there. But without further ado, we're going to get into it. So, man, obviously one of the big things about this game that makes it stand out above other Metroid games is the fact that you have one of the aliens chasing you, not really throughout the game, but throughout certain sections of the game in SAX, which is a clone of Samus, fully powered up with all of the bells and whistles that Samus normally has by the end of the game, just chasing you down, man. I remember when I first encountered SAX and Metroid Fusion, and just the realization that, oh crap, this thing is going to hunt me down and chase me through certain areas, terrified me to no end. But as I was playing it yesterday, I was like, this is just as cool as Mr. X or Nemesis and Resident Evil 2 and 3, respectively, hunting you down in those games and giving you that sense of dread, right? See what I did there? Sense of dread.
It's sponsored by Nintendo.
But like, there's so many cool moments. But man, what did you think of SAX?
I would say that SAX is a masterclass in how you introduce your primary antagonist, and like sequentially. It is like you have no idea she's there, and then the wall explodes. She walks out, she turns, and you see the white eyes, and it's like, okay, who is that? Like, that's not, it looks like me, but that's not me. And then the one room where you see her walk in, but you're not, you're not in danger because you're hidden under the ground. Then a few sequences later, when she walks in on you and starts to attack you, and you realize
Yes.
she's doing a ton of damage, you are completely powerless. Nothing you do even puts a scratch on her. It's like that sequential, like that. And we may get into this more in a minute, but like that's why I'm convinced, after doing this homework a little bit, convinced now more than ever that it is absolutely a horror game. Not, and I don't think that's because, because what makes something horror, I don't think, is like necessarily how scary it feels to watch.
Hmm.
That's part of it, but it's also how the pacing and story is introduced to you. It's
Yeah.
how, you don't, with any horror, any horror media, you don't just show the main villain in full light. You have hints and like, wait, what's going on? And like you have these like, it's a slow drip of like the tension and terror building, and they do that beautifully, not just with SAX, but with many other elements. But it's very
Yeah.
well done with SAX.
And I think what's cool with SAX is like in those moments where they drip feed you that kind of that dread or instill that fear in you of this character. They do so by also showing you bits and pieces of its power here and
Yes.
there. You know, listening to you talking, you mentioned that one where you're hiding underneath the floor and you hear SAX footsteps coming in, that like droning, terrifying doo, doo, doo
Yeah,
thing, you
footsteps.
know, and then you see it come across up to this wall. It goes into a morph ball, drops a power bomb. And you're like, this thing can use power bombs. What the heck?
You don't
And
even
then
have
you,
them yet.
yeah, and you got to roll out of the blast radius of it and hang out over there because you hear it walking again. The doo, doo. It's like it's so terrifying, man. It's like listening to Mr. X walking around. You hear the floorboards creaking inside the Raccoon City Police Department in Resident Evil 2. It just, man, it's so well designed and well placed that it does a good job of instilling that fear in you of like you're going to get utterly annihilated if you even remotely breathe in this thing's direction,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
And so it's cool. It's a great way to just show you the villain, to kind of show you its power here and there, and then force a few situations where you run into it and you have to either hide or try to paralyze it and get out of there or something. It's so good, man. It's so
Mhm.
good.
And the thing is, they could have stopped there and just made and just had SAX sort of like carry the weight of the tension of the game, and made everything
Hmm.
else lesser, like, not as focused. And
Hmm.
yet, part of why it's such a linear game, which, on that, just to sidetrack quickly, it is linear, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize that until after the first time I beat it. It doesn't feel linear. You are
Yeah.
being sent from place to place, but you can technically go anywhere anytime you want. It just won't advance the story, and it won't really do you much good. But it's linear without feeling like it, whereas a game like Skyward Sword is linear and it really feels like it in a bad way.
Right.
So that's good, but that linearity is what gives them the ability to tell that tight story. And
Hmm.
you have SAX breathing down your neck, and the whole time you're like, when is she going to come in again? You have no idea. But then,
Yeah.
Adam will send you to unlock a security door so you can get in and help do a thing in some sector. You'll go in there, you'll unlock it, then you walk out, you're making your way through to do something else, and you hear an explosion that rocks the station.
Yep.
You're like, well, what was that? But nothing is explained. And then you are like rushing back to the navigation room to talk to Adam again. And you're like, go on. And he's like, okay, that was a bad idea. We unlocked it. And I think SAX like blew something up. Go investigate. You're like,
Yep.
great. Now I'm going to walk into this place I've never been. And she's probably in there somewhere. And what just blew up? And like, just so there's the foreboding moments that just come one after another are so well done. Each one is unique and like just well done.
Yeah. Definitely. Kind of keeping on this train of thought with SAX and all that. I remember one scene particularly, and this is kind of getting close towards the end of the game, but you go to this research facility and then you find out that the BSL research station that you're on has this area of the station that's just housing a bunch of Metroids, and you're like, excuse me, what are y'all doing with these?
Kelly in the office. Number one, how dare you?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of questions. First of all, how dare you? But then as you go through, because you're trying to like restart, I think it's like the power or something to the station, and then when you do that, you hear that explosion thing, and
Mm-hmm.
as you make your way back down to the bottom base, you see SAX opening fire on these Metroids, and then you have this countdown thing telling you need to get out of there before that section of the station breaks off and explodes. And after you do that, you're talking to your ship's computer, Adam, and it tells you, it kind of reveals the BSL's um, motives for bringing on the Samus's ship, not ship, her suit, and they're doing research on the Metroids, and they're doing research on. They want to do the research on the X parasite to use it for military operations, and then you find out Adam's going to hold you in this room, and that's when you learn that there's no less than 10 SAXs left on the space station.
Such a great reveal.
Dude, it's like you have this moment of like, you see that chunk of the space station go off and explode, and you're like, okay,
Got her.
yeah, I can breathe a little bit. I don't have to worry about this thing chasing me. And then it tells you there's actually 10 of those left on the space station. You're like, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
Like,
it was awesome.
it was hard enough fighting one or running away from one. Now there's 10 of them on this space station,
Right.
which has me wondering if any of those other SAXs made it off the space station, and they might show up in Metroid Dread.
I know. I'm wondering too.
We'll know more. We'll know more. But I just think that, like, that's what makes this game, that's what elevates this game so far and above the other 2D Metroids, is how well they handled SX. Now, don't get me wrong, Dark Samus is super cool in Metroid Prime, but Dark Samus is nowhere near to this level of terrifying in Metroid Fusion, like, at all.
Now, jog my memory. Dark Samus is technically just Phazon that gain sentience, right?
Right. Yeah, it's just Phazon, like the Phazon
It's just like
wouldn't
energy.
matter. Yeah, and it just gained. It's kind of like Venom from Spider-Man almost.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas SAX is more like something akin to Alien.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. That sounds about right.
I mean,
I'd say SAX is more like the Thing from the Thing, where
oh yeah. I
it
can
can
see
take on, like, if it absorbs someone, it can take on their shape and sound like them
that.
and
Mm-hmm.
move like them. Whereas Dark Samus was just like its own thing. It doesn't shape shift or anything.
Right. That was the other thing too. Is they you learn first the X parasite, like, okay, it can take over a creature, copy it, and then it becomes, it turns into that creature, but it's actually still the X parasite. But then, and that's all you know about it when you first start the game. But then it's like, oh wait, it can connect to computer systems and download data.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh wait, it can overtake a scientist and not just mimic their body, but like soak in all their memories and knowledge, and then
Yep.
go and like overheat the system to try to destroy the station. Or like, you start to learn it's not just mimicking their physical shape. It can do so much more crazy stuff. It's a
Yeah.
really interesting antagonist.
And that was kind of the cool thing I noticed about the X Parasite, was that whereas Metroids were pretty intimidating in the previous games, because they were just, I mean, they would latch onto you and suck the life out of you. But
Right.
with the X Parasites, these things, I noticed that these things behave like an actual parasite or virus, and they learn and adapt and grow, because there's a point where the X Parasites start becoming like frozen, because they know, oh,
Yes,
you're weak to ice. We're going to change our molecular makeup to be ice. So if you try to absorb us, we're just going to kill you.
that was so cool.
Dude, playing that again yesterday, it blew my mind that they did that, because I'm like, these things are getting smart.
Yeah.
And then when they like absorbed the data and they took the various suit data from you,
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, dude, what if these X parasites are still around in Metroid Dread, and that's why the ME units are corrupt, because the X parasites learned how to corrupt them and are just taking them over.
Right, because they can do that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it just, dude, the X parasites are on a whole other level of threatening than what Metroids are. Don't get me wrong, love Metroids, but the X parasite, dude, is way more terrifying than anything else, because it learns. It can outsmart you
Yeah.
if it
Well,
wants
and
to.
the ingenuity, and going through this again, the ingenuity of how they wrote that learning process that the X parasite goes through in Fusion. Like a great example is the ice ones, where they're like, all right, we're going to run over to the ice area, freeze up, and come back because we know that's going to
Yep.
hurt her because she has Metroids in her blood. And then you get the various suit, and they all attack you like, ha ha, and you just absorb them, and it's no big deal. And then they realize it and start running away. But
Yeah.
then when you fight that security robot, when it breaks out and tries to take you out, that kind of spidery looking, not the spider, but you know what I'm talking about, the
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
security robot. And you fight it off, but it doesn't die. It just escapes and leaves. But you expose its neural core before it runs away.
Mm-hmm.
And right before you do that fight, you gain the super missile, and that's what you use to defeat it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it first fights you, it just throws grenades at you and has some pillars of fire kind of attacks and stuff. Then it leaves. When you encounter it again, much later in the game, the X parasites have gotten into the cracks you made in the armor, got taken over its neural network, and then used some of the DNA from SAX, or not from SAX, but from you during that fight where you just gotten your missiles. And the next fight you have with that robot, it's shooting missiles at you.
Yep.
And it's like, dude, that's so cool. Like, that's such great writing.
Yeah.
And it's all in world. There's no dialogue. It's all storytelling, like in world.
Yep. And that's what I loved about it, is how those boss fights just seem to like just ramp up in both difficulty, but just I don't know what the word is. I don't know if terror is the right word, but just how they just keep ramping up the further you get into the game, because of how the X parasite is just learning and trying its best to outwit you and just outmaneuver you. And this is one of the coolest reveals in the game, and I had completely forgotten about this. But there's a point where you're running through the space station and you drop down into this ice room and you see a frozen statue of Ridley.
Yes, dude.
And when you get close to it, its eyes turn red and you're like, oh, dude, I'm about to get into a fight. It falls apart and there's an X parasite floating in the air and it disappears. And you're like, did that thing just copy Ridley? Like,
yes, dude.
Like, what? Dude, the X parasite is easily one of the coolest things that they've come up with in this series, and I hope it makes a return in Metroid Dread. And so
that right there is such a beautiful example where less is more, because in any modern video game, that moment would have been very dialogue heavy. And Samus would have been like reflecting, now wait a minute, that's Ridley. Now I fought Ridley back on, SR388 or whatever. Like, and it's like they just let the moment be. And it's like they let you sit there and go, that's Ridley. How is that Ridley? How is he on this ship? Oh my gosh, that's the X parasite. And like, so many things happen in a matter of like 5 seconds, and then it just leaves.
yeah.
And it's just, they just kind of let that be. And there's that whole game's that way. They just let the game tell its own story. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's really good. And even when they do some storytelling stuff, like when you're dialoguing with Adam and the little hints of like, you see the shadowy figure, like asking Adam, is Samus catching on to anything? And he's like, no, I don't think so. It's like, okay, good. Keep it that way.
Right.
And then you have Samus, like you have her inner monologue as she's going up the elevators at random points, which I think this is how they should have handled Samus in Other M. I love how when Samus talks, it's valuable information and it actually sounds like Samus versus on SR388, I found the Metro, like the goofy, dreamy voice thing. That's another end, but like it's just it's so well done on all the different aspects of this game.
One of the bullet points I wrote down was, there's very little fat on this steak.
Yeah,
it is a tight story, and they use, whether it's dialogue or in-world storytelling or whatever it is, they use it all to its full effect, and it's very tight. And there's not a lot of fluff. It's all excellent.
Yep. It really is, man. And it's just really, really well done. And so as we kind of start landing the plane a little bit, there isn't really, I was trying to find themes and stuff to talk about in this game, but it's so bare, I guess, or I guess bare is a good word for it in regards to storytelling. There isn't really much to go off of, at least like what we normally do on the show here is like, we try to analyze the themes, worldviews, and things like that. The only thing I really caught on to in this game is you see, because in the past games, specifically Super Metroid, you learn that the Galactic Federation is wanting to use Metroids for some kind of military application. And they don't really go too in depth into it. They don't really speak a whole lot on it. They just mention that that's something that they wanted to do. And in this game, they carry that plot thread through, but then they also add in that they wanted to learn more about the X parasite and how they could weaponize it.
Mhm.
And it's something to where even at the end of the game, after you leave the space station, Samus says that what they were doing was wrong. And there's going to be tribunals, there's going to be hearings about this. And she just doesn't know what the future is going to look like, because this opened a can of worms in a lot of ways. And we'll see how that plays out in Metroid Dread. But it just kind of it got me thinking about how it almost seems like in man's pursuit of power, we wind up destroying ourselves. You know, I've been reading this book called Robopocalypse recently, where these researchers were trying to create the perfect robot, but every single time they do it, it goes haywire. It starts becoming sentient, and they have to shut it down. But then there's one time where they do this, and they're not able to shut it down quick enough because it just learned how to outwit people. And it seems like it's not so much the things that we research or search out that are the catalyst of our own destruction. It's ourselves that do it. It's almost like we're uh, a self-destructive species. And so it just kind of got me thinking of the whole verse of, what is it worth to gain the whole world, yet lose our soul in the process? But I mean, what do you think? What do you think this game has to say in regards to that particular theme of showing us what happens when we pursue things that are probably best left buried or not sought out?
I think it's actually a pretty good parallel. So like, man seeking power and like more and seeking things we ought not to be seeking comes out as sin in a lot of scenarios where it's like we just pursue that into to a sinful degree where it's like overkill. And I think it's actually the X parasite is actually a great um parallel to sin, not because it's like, oh, it's the bad guy and sin is bad, but it's like the scientist's attitude is like, no, we can contain this.
Mm,
Like we
yeah.
can handle it. Don't worry, we'll go in there. And Samus is the only one that has actually seen what it can do and understands. It's like, no, trust me, you don't want to come in here. Like I've seen this, you need to get out. And the scientist is like, no, we got this. And it's that like, like you said, like that pursuit of power and like more to their own destruction. And that's how we treat sin sometimes too, where it's like, I can contain this, I can white knuckle it as it were, and like tough it out. Whereas the Bible's like, no, just run away, just turn the other direction.
Yeah.
um, so
I was going to say, like, that even reminded me of this quote by John Owen that I think we bring up a lot on this podcast, where he says, "Be killing sin, or it will be killing you."
mhm.
And that's kind of what she tells the ship's AI at the end, is like, no, tell the Federation to not come here, because if they come here, the X parasite's going to overwhelm them and it's going to spread throughout the galaxy. Like you
Mhm.
cannot let them come in here and dabble with this, because it's going to lead to death and destruction. And that's kind of where it leads to this cool reawakening of the AI, where it learns about Adam Malkovich, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, they've uploaded his consciousness or whatever into the computer. I'll just access that and become that. And then it
Mhm.
leads to Samus getting off the ship and
So
and,
cool.
just, and allegedly destroying the X parasite. We'll
Allegedly.
find out in Dread. But
Well, one of the more sinister revelations is when you realize that near the end of the game, you go and get one of the later power ups and get reprimanded for it. You're like, wait a minute, that's what I've been doing the whole game. Why is this bad? And you find
yeah,
out later they actually wanted you to knock it off, and they stopped giving you support data for upgrades because they didn't want you to eradicate it because they wanted to contain it. So they had
yep,
gotten so carried away with this thing, they were willing to put Samus's life in danger to make sure
yep,
she didn't eradicate the parasite.
yep.
Dang, dude, they got carried away.
Yeah, I remember that, and I was just like, dude, they straight up, like, they at that point they basically said, you know what, let Samus die. We don't care. We're gonna get this
Exactly.
thing, and if she dies in the process, we really don't care.
Yeah.
Which, again, we probably should have recorded this episode after Metroid Dread came out so we could make some cool comparisons. But it leaves you wondering, like, what is Samus's relationship going to be like with the Galactic Federation after they betrayed her and kind of left her for dead
That's a
after
good
this?
question. That's a good question.
So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see. But that was the thing that I noticed with this game, is that, and what you brought up about X Parasite kind of being a parallel for Sin in a lot of ways, is really, I think, very apt, because Sin, especially if you read through the Screw Tape letters, like you see how subtle sin and temptation and just the forces of darkness are and how they adapt to different things, just like the X Parasite did. And its sole purpose is to isolate you and destroy you. And that's what the X Parasite tried to do multiple times. Um, but and we could spin this into, you know, putting on the whole armor of God stuff, but I feel like that'd be super cheesy if we did that. But you know, it's one of those things where again, Metroid Fusion is a short game. There isn't really a whole lot to the story, but I think with those particular themes, you know, kind of getting into the themes of horror, and this is something I noticed even with Resident Evil, is it's always a what's that phrase called, or that literary device, cautionary tale of how you shouldn't let your thirst or hunger for power take over kind of your senses, because that's really the true horror, is when you get so blinded to the pursuit of power that it just leads to all sorts of horrors that you don't want to open the doors to. And in Metroid Fusion, it gives you an inside look to all that, you know, because of the BSL's I guess ignorant attempt at research. It led to the death of everyone on the station. And then because of the Galactic Federation's pursuit for power, it almost led to Samus being killed, who really is probably the only person in the galaxy that can stop this threat. And who knows what horrors would have been unleashed on the galaxy had Samus not stopped the X Parasite and blew up that station.
Right.
So
there's that old saying, sin takes you farther than you want to go, keeps you longer than you want to stay, and costs you more than you want to pay.
Yeah.
I feel like that they saw that.
Yeah. But I mean, the good news is we got Jesus, that through him we can have freedom from that. We can be free of all that corruption and things of that nature. And so that's kind of the beauty of the gospel, is that he died in our place. He died the death that we should have died, but through him we can be free of that, and we can have newness of life. And because I'm still thinking about it, we can put on the armor of God and fight back against sin. So there it is. That is our discussion on Metroid Fusion. I think that's a good place to leave it there with the gospel. But as always, dear listeners, if you have any questions about the game series itself, or you have some thoughts about the game, feel free to share those on the different social media channels that we are on: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the places, Discord, and things of that nature.